So one of my biggest wishes when I started my book project 2 years ago is I wanted to release it during Diwali, which is our Indian New Year. And just the significance of Diwali, it's, light versus darkness and just bringing light into your hearts, into your world, into your homes. And that's what Finding Pockets of Sunshine is all about.
You just lost your loved one. Now what? Welcome to the Grief and Life podcast, where we explore this new reality through grief-colored lenses. Openly, authentically, I'm your host, Nina Rodriguez. Let's get started.
How can we find pockets of sunshine in the midst of grief and life's challenges? Today's guest is Dr. Monica Krishnan, a clinical pharmacist with over 25 years of experience and a dedicated advocate for grief and mental health. After losing her husband in 2011, she experienced high-functioning depression. Then 2018 marked a pivotal turning point in her healing journey and the commencement of her advocacy work. Since then, she has shared her journey and spread awareness through speaking, writing, and most recently, as the author of her first children's book, Finding Pockets of Sunshine, which aims to help children understand grief and mental health at an early age. I am very much looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the Grief and Life podcast, Dr. Monica.
Thank you, Nina. It's an honor to be here. I'm such a fan of your work and truly, truly thankful for you.
Likewise, and I'm thankful for you as well. You have such a beautiful blend of lived experience and your education and your current work, and I'm excited to dig into it. So let's start in 2011, which was the pivotal moment in your life. How that journey started and where you are today. Start wherever you'd like, please.
Yeah, 2011 was a big pivotal moment in my life. I lost my husband to a rare form of brain cancer. We had been married 7 years total. 2 of those years he battled cancer. When he passed, my children were only 3 and 5. So here I now found myself as a solo parent navigating this world and just felt so lost in life.
I could see how disorienting those type of changes can be, especially as a single mother with the kids and trying to understand my life was supposed to be this way, whatever that means, and then it's not. And not only is it not, but the whole dynamic changes because I'm understanding that at that point you were taking care of your husband. You were a full-time caretaker, which is a lot of work. And you go from having this life to having to start over in this context. What was that like for you?
It was really hard. So I'm a clinical pharmacist by profession. I took 2 years off to be, like you said, a full-time caretaker, from hands-on nursing to managing his medications to taking him to all his doctor's appointments to physical therapy. I mean, everything. So taking 2 years off from work, and then kind of getting my feet back into clinical pharmacy. The hardest part was when I was applying for jobs, people would question me, well, why haven't you worked for 2 years? And then having to share the real reason. I would find myself in interviews just bawling and crying and telling them that, I took 2 years off to take care of my dying husband.
And the heaviness of that, the fullness of that experience is hard to explain. I've talked to caregivers and it is a grief in and of itself, a big grief, seeing your person decline and the effort and the life, releasing that life that you thought you would have with very little options as to how you feel in control in that moment. So I could see that. And I'm sorry that so many people didn't see and honor maybe what you had gone through as worthy of, look at this person managed to get through all of that. She could be an asset to our company. But thankfully, there was one fateful visit to this pharmacy. Tell us about that story, because it sounds like it was very serendipitous and kind of changed everything.
I get teary-eyed just thinking about it. Like, I think about divine intervention, I was up in the city where my parents live, which is where I reside now. And I was literally, Nina, wearing yoga pants, a tank top, a hat, and my mom sends me to the grocery store to go get some yogurt. And next to this Albertsons grocery store is a small independent pharmacy called Saugus Drugs. And I said, oh, what the heck? Let me just walk in. There was no reason for me to walk in. I walked in and I walked all the way back to the pharmacy. And this really nice gentleman walks out, greets me. And I said to him, hi, my name is Monica and I'm looking for a job. And he looks at me and he's like, my pharmacist just quit an hour ago.
Wow.
And I was like, what? So this happened on a Friday. On Monday, the following Monday, I get a full official interview and was hired. And that job, till this day, Nina, I'm no longer with that company. But till this day, that job, in the 25 years I've worked in different avenues of pharmacy, is my favorite job. I feel that was like my soul's birth to kind of come back into Monica again. And the way I got the job, I look back at it 12 years later, that was divine intervention. There's no other way to explain it.
Absolutely. And I love that story. Thank you for sharing it, because in our grief and in what seems like a hopeless reality at times, in that desperation, in the world of questions and very little answers, moments like this could be such a lifeline, and they could quite literally mark the beginning of what you said, like the coming back home to Monica.
Yes.
So thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. And I'm glad you got that, that to this day, it remains one of your fondest memories.
Yes.
I love that. So even with the beauty in that, you still experienced what you call high functioning anxiety. Please share a little bit about that, how you experienced it, and then when that shifted for you, please.
Yeah, so I battled high functioning depression. For the audience who don't really understand what high functioning depression is, it basically is you looked all put together, right? Your hair's done, your makeup's done, you've got your nails done. From the physical appearance, you don't look like you're depressed. But truthfully, it's when all that stuff comes off, right? You wash your face, you tie up your hair, change your clothes. You just kind of crawl into bed, or you crawl into like the corner of the bathroom, which is what I kind of did for many years. So people would just assume that, oh, well, she's at work. She's going to the blowout lounge to get her hair done. She's wearing her bright pink lipstick. She's got to be okay. And that's far from what I was going through. I was not okay. And I battled for a good 7 years. A year after my husband passed away, I walked into my doctor's office and I said, you know what? I'm not okay. I need help. And I started taking a low-dose antidepressant. And that's when I started finding pockets of sunshine in my life.
And thank you for bringing that up. I realized I misspoke. I said high functioning anxiety. That might have been like a Freudian slip on my end, because I experience a lot of anxiety.
No, I think anxiety and depression, they intertwine.
Thank you for your honesty in that, because so that is something that a lot of people have a hard time coming to terms with and expressing. And yet it seems to be common. I don't have the statistics on this, but it seems to be an experience where there's a fine line between grief and when it could turn to actual depression. And so I heard you talk about your mental health toolbox. What was in your toolbox at that time that you decided to tap into, obviously with medications being some of them, and then asking for help?
Yeah, so my toolbox from day one was therapy. Like the very first thing that I did for myself was start grief therapy. I put my children in group support. I joined a gym. It's one of the first things. I have always been someone who has loved to dance, Indian dance. So Zumba, like, I'll kid you not, like there were times in the earlier days where I would be in the back of a Zumba class, just bawling for an hour, crying. Obviously no one could see me because I'm in the back. But I got my cardio in, my workout in. And so for my toolbox in the earlier days, obviously medication, therapy, working out, physical exercise, self-help books, and just trying to find people who I can connect with, who are kind of going through the same thing that I was going through, which was really hard because there were not too many, 36-year-old South Asian women who I could connect to, who could really understand what I was going through.
Right. And out of curiosity, did you ever find somebody that resembled you in terms of culture and your age and your particular experience of loss? Did you ever connect with somebody or just not at all?
So I did connect with someone who was not South Asian. She was Caucasian. She was a neighbor, and she was the one who actually introduced me to the grief counselor that I worked with for 6 months. So she kind of became like, not only was she my neighbor, she kind of became my go-to person as to like, how do I navigate this? Like, I'm feeling angry right now, but then at the same time, I'm having a hard time getting to acceptance and, the 5 stages of grief. Like, my emotions are all over the place. And so she kind of like held my hand the first 6 months. She no longer lives in my community, but I'll forever be grateful because she held my hand. And sometimes it only takes like even can be a complete stranger who can say, me too, or I know. And you have this like instant connection.
And that's
you feel like you're not alone.
That's one of the most powerful medicines, if you will, that presence, that I see you and me too. And there's no fixing, there's no bringing our person back, but just knowing that we're not alone is powerful, powerful medicine. Thank you for bringing that up. And I'm, as far as the 5 stages, talk a little bit more about that, because there's this split, if you will, in the grief world about whether or not they're helpful to some people and exactly how does it play out. So what's your take on that as well?
So my take on that, and it's something that I've actually addressed in my children's book, is everyone gets to acceptance in their own way. For some, it can take 5 years. For some, it can take 20 years. For some, it can take an entire lifetime. Some people cannot get to acceptance and they struggle. My takeaway is give yourself grace. You can bounce back from, anger to denial to all the different stages. I think the most important thing is to allow yourself to really sit in those emotions and feel them, because if we try to numb them, they're going to keep coming up. So my takeaway is give yourself grace.
Grace is so important. And actually, that phrase in particular was the one that helped me free myself from expectations during my early grief. I shared with a friend, I said, the most difficult thing took me about 3 to 4 weeks to get over it. So let's double that time. This is how my mind tried to understand grief and the loss of my brother. And I said, so it should take about 2 to 3 months. And then that time rolled around and I felt awful still. And if anything, I was more confused about what I was feeling. And I said, oh my gosh, this is forever, isn't it? And so I panicked. I called a girlfriend. Her mother had passed away 10 months prior from breast cancer. And I said, tell me what to do, please. Like, tell me, what do I do here? And she said, oh, honey, show yourself grace. Like, this is so unique to each of us. And you're going to find your own answers, but show yourself grace. Be so gentle with yourself. So thank you for saying that. And I love that you incorporated this in your children's book, because what a lesson. If only we had these tools when we were younger, it would have changed everything. And I'm so thankful that these conversations are happening now, better now than never. Like you said, maybe back then back then, even 5 years ago back then, there were little to no resources publicly available. There was no public discourse the way that it's happening now. Yes. So what a beautiful gift to be able to bring this conversation at the forefront of your work and to children. So I would like to know why children, why not maybe teenagers, right? What made you choose children in particular?
So my book, Finding Pockets of Sunshine, I wrote it for children, depending on their reading capabilities. This book is designed for ages 9 and older. It's not your typical picture book. It's an actual story.
There's about watching on YouTube, you could actually see the book.
It's a book that's designed to read as a family. So let's say you want to read it to a 5-year-old. Then the family members, a mom, a dad, a parent, a grandparent can read it. I've designed the book that it's not just for a child to pick up and read on their own. I've designed it to be very interactive as a family, because it is the family unity is what's going to help you get through those difficult times. And so when I was looking for a children's book on mental health and grief, I couldn't find anything that I could relate to as a South Asian woman. This book is also designed not only for South Asian families, it's for global minds, global readers. But for me, when we can start talking about mental health from an early age, where you can understand things like, oh, I need to ask for help. Oh, you too, you feel these emotions as well. Oh, I feel sad today. Today I'm just struggling. If you can start talking about those things at the age of 8, 9, 10, then it can become something very easy to do as a teenager. And then we work our way to, young adult, and then, obviously adulthood. So I think there's just so much stigma in general when it comes to mental health. And I see that as a clinical pharmacist. So when we can educate our children that it's normal to talk about mental health and grief and all these topics, then why not start that at an early age?
Absolutely. And there's an anchoring. I heard the phrase grief inclusive, creating grief inclusive spaces. And I love that because grief is a part of the human experience. So long as you're human, you will probably experience grief. Why not be empowered and have the tools to navigate it, have the language? I feel like it's a language too, knowing how to talk to each other about it, knowing how to talk about our grief and feelings and emotions. And rewinding a little bit, talking about how you mentioned your toolbox, right? And you included exercise. There is a physical component to grief. There's the emotions, there's the mind, there's the spirituality, which I know that's played a big part in your life as well. So having these conversations earlier as a family would be incredibly powerful and life-altering in the best way, and would be very enriching. So thank you for that. Curious, does spirituality play a part in that book as well? Did you include that, or did you intentionally leave that part out?
So no, there is no spirituality in this book, but that may come in book 2 and book 3.
I love that because in working with grief, there is a spiritual aspect. And for the sake of nuance, spirituality is not the same as religion. I want to make that separation. We're not talking about religion here. But there is a spiritual component to this experience. And I've heard anecdotally, it's the part that unlocks the healing for a lot of people.
Yes.
And it sounds like that's part of how it happened with you. And I believe it was like around 2018. So
yes.
Maybe share that beautiful transformation as well.
I felt really lost pretty much all the way up till 2017. I battled my high functioning depression. I was on the go, working, raising kids, family, just dealing with home. And then, I was off social media for a really long time. And then I went on social media and I reconnected with a dear friend who happens to be one of my best friends right now, Dr. Deepthi Gandhi. And she had posted something about a conference, a women's conference called Evolve. And, I messaged her, I said, what is this? And so that was the beginning of me being very curious of what else is out there. What is this? I'm seeking answers to life's questions. So I went to this conference and it sparked something in me where I was like, okay, I'm not meant to be in this little, bubble or, categorized as widow. I'm more than that, because for many years, Nina, people would just address me, so-and-so's widow, this is widow, and you're checking off these boxes on tax forms and paperwork, widow. So it just became like, oh my God, is that all I am now?
Right.
And I went to this conference and I just was introduced to this beautiful group who today I get to call my soul sisters. And these were just women who just were at this beautiful spiritual space. Their vibration level was super high. They were just living very consciously. And I was like, it was like this electric shock for me. I was like, okay, there's more to my life. What does this mean? And then in 2020, I was introduced to who happens to be my spiritual teacher today. Her name is Priya Jain. I'm so honored because she actually has written a testimonial in my book for me. She now takes me really, really deep into my spiritual practice. But before I get into the spiritual practice, she has to crack and get deeper into that trauma and into that healing. And the next thing you know, from 2020 to 2022, it was like an onion layer of trauma and healing and trauma and healing. And it's hard work. It is such hard work, trauma healing. And then I started going on these like beautiful meditation retreats. My Vipassana, which I did last year. So I then came to the realization that the way my life unfolded, it had to be that way. It had to be that way for me to be in my dharma, to be able to be of service to other women, men, families who are going through loss and grief. And over the last, 7 years, people have reached out to me. Monica, can you talk to this woman? She lost her husband. Monica, can you talk to this person? She's lost her husband. And these are complete strangers who have picked up the phone and said, hey, how can I help you? So that's when I started getting these like visions of like, okay, I'm tapping into something that's way beyond my comprehension, but it feels like this is where I need to be.
It sounds like almost like a calling that you didn't expect, and then you answer the call. So thank you for answering the call. And I love that you say, I'm not this identity, because there's so many labels, even for tax purposes, like you said. There's so many labels that are put on somebody who has experienced loss. In my case, I remember I went back to work, and my colleague said, well, now that you're an only child, and her words faded into the background, but it was the first time that my identity felt threatened, because I'd never thought of myself as anything as an only child. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that I had a sibling, and I never thought of myself as not a sister, right? So it's interesting in your case, so-and-so's widow, and then that label is put on you, and technically, sure, that's what we are now, sure, but that's not the only thing we are. And we are so much bigger than even our names. Even our given things, like we're so much bigger than all of this. So talk to us about that journey, that cracking open that you talk about, that inner work, that peeling of layers of the onion. What nugget of truth did you touch that made you not only answer the call, but really embrace the fullness of this experience?
I think for me, it was really figuring out who is Monica at her core essence. Who is she? And I learned that in my Vipassana. I took off all the labels. I took off mom, clinical pharmacist, author, friend, daughter. I stripped it all off, and I'm like, who the heck is Monica? And it's that spirit within us. It's this beautiful spirit within us. And I tapped into her, and I realized at that moment that we are not the labels that society puts on us. We live in a society, we live in a matrix where people have to categorize us. Married, single, divorced, clinical pharmacist. I mean, you name it. There's a label for everything. But that is not who we are at our core essence. These are just temporary things in life. And it's something that I had to, I have heard it all, even like in the earlier days, like even people I thought were my friends would categorize me as a widow, or they'll make comments that are just inappropriate. And maybe they didn't realize that those words were hurting me, but they were like slowly crushing me inside to a point where I was starting to believe what others were saying, what society was saying, what trusted friends were saying. So then I went through this like vicious cycle of self-pity. I was starting to pity myself. Like maybe what they're saying is true. And it is thankfully to this beautiful spiritual journey of coming home to myself.
Thank you for that. And that coming home is incredibly powerful, personal. It looks different for everybody. That is part of why they say, grief is different for everybody. That's an aspect of that. And yet when you get there, when you touch that unseen space, that truth within, I'm not this, I'm not even my career. In my case, I changed what I do for a living. I said, I don't, this doesn't even fit me or describe me anymore. There's a different purpose now. And that willingness to shed, to acknowledge what is underneath all of that, and then to show up in your full self is so incredibly powerful. And it sounds like you were able to do that, not just with Vipassana, I always get this wrong, Vipassana, the retreat, which I want you to talk about in a little bit. You harnessed all the tools in your toolbox. So it was the physical, it was the, talking to the grief counselors and the therapists, and relying on family and community, your neighbor and your parents. It was all of it. It's never just this one thing. A lot of people think it's what's the prescription, if you will, no pun intended, but what's the prescription for my grief and how do I get rid of it? And it's like, oh gosh, it's so much bigger than that. Yeah. And it encompasses all these different aspects of our lives, and it taps into so many of our resources. But once we accept that, it's like, okay, this is the way it's supposed to happen. Like, let me just explore, address it with curiosity, and take it from there. So I love that you went from physical to spiritual to medical to family to all of it, to the person that's sitting in front of me today, and helping other people with her calling. And for those who don't know, talk about the retreat and what exactly that is, and the whole power behind sitting in stillness and in quiet.
Yeah, it's one of the most powerful things I've ever done. Probably one of the hardest things too. So last year, I went on my very first Vipassana. So for those of you who don't know what it is, it basically means to sit in stillness. And so I sat in stillness for 4 days. We had to turn in our phones. So for 4 days, no phones, no electronics, nothing. It's this beautiful spiritual center up on the hills. It's just beautiful, several 100-acre avocado farm where it's just green, lush everywhere. And, I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about who am I? Like, who am I beyond all these labels? It was just a very transformational experience. Sitting with your thoughts is a very hard thing to do. So for this first 24 hours, it's like chitter chatter. Oh my God, I can't quiet my thoughts. But, they do help us in the retreats with breath work, meditations, yoga, to help to get into that point of complete stillness, which was by day 2, going into day 3, I was at complete stillness. No thoughts at all going through my mind. Nothing. It was like, holy cow, like I have no thoughts going through my head. I mean, I remember sitting in a garden for an hour and a half watching a spider create a spider web. I literally sat there for an hour and a half and I'm like, this is the most fascinating thing I've ever seen. Better than any Spider-Man movie in my life. And it made me realize the importance of stillness. We live in such a busy world, and we live in a world where we are constantly on the go. If it's not this, it's that, it's this, especially as parents. When you're not doing your own thing, you're doing something for your children or, at work or for your family, or whoever it is, your parents. And so it made me realize that it is so important to rest. And I have to tell you, it is after the Vipassana that the story of finding pockets of sunshine kind of came through me. And so I began writing it immediately. And so, the book idea came to me a year before that, but the story I started writing right after my Vipassana. So I feel like I tapped into a really beautiful creative side of me.
That sounds amazing. All of it. And sitting in stillness, to me, sounds wonderful. And first of all, I'm an introvert. I love being quiet. I love my solitude. I love it. I thrive in it, but I know it's not easy. Yeah. And what I can say is, we live in a connected world. We have these devices and I'm showing my iPhone, and it's constantly that people reaching out to you. There's always a ding and a ping and a message and something to pay attention to. And then as a mother, like you said, your kids and just life.
Yes.
So to be able to slow down, I like to say grief is an invitation to slow down among many other definitions. it can be an invitation to slow down. So allowing yourself that space, I would imagine it's also just good for your mental health as well to slow down and rest and recharge. And there's so much power in nature, like letting nature nurture us. Like you said, you're sitting there watching the spider weave and just being mesmerized by this. And that stillness is what allows those beautiful moments of inspiration to come through. And here's a book out of it. So look at how full circle all of this is.
Yes.
I love it. And so we were talking before, and you were mentioning that you're doing a second Vipassana. So as of this recording, we are recording in mid-October, and your book is coming out in about a couple of weeks. So tell us about this alignment of, rest and then the fullness that's going to happen in November. Tell us about what to expect in the coming months.
Yeah. So one of my biggest wishes when I started my book project 2 years ago is I wanted to release it during Diwali, which is our Indian New Year. And just the significance of Diwali, it's, light versus darkness, and just bringing light into your hearts, into your world, into your homes. And that's what Finding Pockets of Sunshine is all about. So, for me, it was just beautifully aligned where Diwali happens, the book launches, and then a week later, I go back to a 4-day stillness. Things are very busy right now. It's good busy, but I'm also feeling like my body needs to be grounded for what's to come. November is going to be very busy. December is holidays. It's very busy. It's going to be a busy 6 weeks of a lot of content, a lot of book interviews, a lot of just podcast tapings. So for me, it was very important to ground myself, rest, preserve that energy of what's to come, to refuel, to rejuvenate. And like you said, like there's just so much power in solitude. And so I'm extremely excited to go away to Vipassana again. And I'm getting to go again with last time I went alone, but this time I get to go with 3 of my really best friends.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So it's such an exciting thing. Obviously, we can't hang out and talk, but being able to be in each other's presence in solitude is probably one of the most magical things you can do with a friend.
Truly. And it sounds magical. I feel like you said, you can't talk, but there is so much you can communicate in silence too.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. I'm happy for you. I'm inspired, and maybe I'll do that in the near future as well. I think it sounds wonderful. And I want to highlight that, especially when you're grieving or going through a hard time, build in those moments of rest, build intentionally, go on the retreats if that's something that's accessible, or just go walk in nature if that's something that's accessible. So build those in around the demands of life. The demands will always be there, but there's something very empowering and grounding about being able to dedicate time to ourselves very intentionally. And you could even do it with friends. So that's great.
Yeah. And I also want to highlight that grief looks different for everybody. You can also have pockets of sunshine in your grieving journey where you do something and it makes you happy. And that's okay too. I think a lot of people feel like when you're grieving, you need to be sad all the time, or you need to cry all the time. And that's not the case. You could, go on a trip with a friend and have a good time, yet you can still be grieving. You could buy a nice purse. Whatever it is that, for me, it was lipstick. I was literally buying lipstick all the time. I kid you not. I think at the time I had 100 different pink lipsticks. I was obsessed with pink lipsticks.
That's the first time I hear that, but I could see how that whatever brings you that pocket of sunshine, that pocket of joy.
Yeah, it was pink lipsticks. But, it's so important to remember that your journey of grief is your journey, and don't let anyone ever make you feel bad or not good enough because, they think that your journey should be a certain way, but you're not building up to the expectations. Which I faced a lot. So my message, even in my book, have grace for your journey. That's what makes you special. That's what makes you unique. And that's your grief story.
Beautiful. And thank you for bringing that up, because I feel like people say that, even friends and family will say, oh, take as long as you need and, show yourself grace. And they will say that. And then the year mark comes around and they're like, wait, you're still not over it? So there's this underlying expectation of, sure, take your time or whatever, but everybody has a definition of what that time should be. So thank you for bringing up that, it's very personal. It could take years. It could be, some people, they kind of have that normal grief where it's, okay, I'm sad, but, thank you for your life and moving on to the next thing. And there's other griefs that stick with us for a lifetime, the loss and how we process it. So it looks different for everybody. And it could be from pink lipstick to retreats to all the things. I love different expressions. Absolutely. So how can people get your book? Where can they work with you? How can they find more of Dr. Monica?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's been an honor to talk to you. My Instagram handle, I'm sure you'll share that in the notes, is at Dr. Monica PharmD. My book, Finding Pockets of Sunshine, will be available on Amazon starting November 1st. I'll also have a link in my bio, as well as a website will be going up soon as well around the holidays. So my social media page starting mid-November will be flooded with book content. I also have an Instagram page for the actual book itself. And you can find that also on my main Instagram handle. It's listed on there.
And the illustrations are beautiful. Who did the artwork?
So it's this incredible artist named Prince Segudu, who, believe it or not, lives on the other side of the world in South Africa. A mutual friend of mine introduced me to this media house. It's based in South Africa called Right and Shine Media House. And the CEO of the media house, her and I met 3 years ago. And what started off as a TEDx session, to do a TEDx session, turned into, I don't know if I want to do a TEDx right now, but something is calling me to do a book. Well, I was bouncing ideas back and forth to her. First, it was a memoir. And then it was something was like, no, it's got to be something for children. And so we started bouncing ideas back and forth. So he's part of her team. And we literally, I'll have to show you, like it started off as stick figures. Here, let me show you this real quick.
Just like stick figures.
Okay.
I like that.
These are my stick figures. So here's scene one stick figure. And then this is scene one picture.
Beautiful. Wow. And I hope if you're listening, there's going to be a link for the YouTube video so you can see what we're talking about there. I love seeing a good evolution from idea to ideation to production to the final product. That journey in and of itself feels so magical. So thank you for sharing that, from stick figure to this beautiful illustration. And I like asking because I find that authors are very intentional with who they partner with in terms of, from illustration to all the things. There's always an intention and there was a connection there that felt more profound than beyond the book even. So I thank you for sharing that. And I love everything that you're doing. And we only have a few minutes here, so I want to give you space to maybe say something that's in your heart today or something that we didn't cover that you would like our listeners to receive today.
Well, if it's okay with you, I wrote this poem about grief, and I would love to read it to the audience.
Absolutely. Please do.
Okay. It's called The Butterfly Effect. It's chapter 13 of my book. In a garden where the sunbeams play, among the flowers they love to stay. Butterflies dance on the gentle breeze, their colors are bright, a sight to seize. Yet in our hearts there lies a grief, for every flight there's a brief belief, that in their wings a message is kept, of loved ones gone for whom we have wept. But let us see, in their graceful flight, a symbol of hope, shining so bright. For though our loved ones are now afar, they're like these butterflies, a beautiful star. So when you feel the weight of grief, remember the butterflies and their joyful relief. They remind us of the love that stays, and the beautiful memories that always blaze. In every flutter, in every dance, they tell us to embrace life's chance, to live with love, to let go of fear. For those in the world, For in this world we have those dear. So watch the butterflies, let them guide your heart's journey, let it not hide. For in their flight there's a story told of love that grows and never grows old.
Wow, Dr. Monica, thank you. That was beautiful. And if you could see, I am a big fan of butterflies. They are so symbolic. And now we get to have this additional message through your beautiful book. So thank you for the gift. Thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for answering the call and sharing your beautiful service and wisdom and knowledge with the world. If you, as a listener, would like to get a copy of this book, I'm going to link everything in the show notes. And I feel like that's the perfect conclusion, the perfect bow to tie this conversation with. Thank you so much, Dr. Monica.
Thank you, Nina.
That's it for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Grief and Light podcast. I'd also love to connect with you and hear your thoughts and your stories. Feel free to share them with me via my Instagram page at Grief and Light, or you can also visit griefandlight.com for more information and updates. Thank you so much for being here, for being you, and always remember, you are not alone.